2, 3, 4, 5. We do have we do have a quorum, but I'd like to wait another minute or two for the rest of the board to be here.
Scott, what do you think being a student in New York City is like right now? I mean, is it, do the young people get something out of being in New York City?
You're asking me, Chris?
Yeah, about your daughter.
Yeah, I mean, for Sarah, it's the arts, and even though the arts are quiet now, she's still in the city, and the city is, there's still stores she can pop into that support the arts, and her one class in person right now is dance, so which is nice because it gives her a chance to move and interact, and yeah. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, dance, I don't know how you would do remotely.
Well, you would do it in a kitchen with an external speaker, moving everything out of the way.
Oh, that's what happened in your house.
And that's what was happening.
Scott, let's start the meeting. I think
go ahead. You're good. We're recording.
We got 6. Okay, so I'd like to call to order the February 8th, 2021 virtual workshop meeting of the Highland Park Board of Education. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meeting of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act, the Highland Park Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting, setting forth the date, time, and location to be submitted for publication to the Home News Tribune and Star Ledger and posted on the board's website at least 48 hours in advance of this meeting. Members of the public who wish to address the board will be given the opportunity to do so before the board adjourns for the evening. During this meeting, we ask that all members of the public mute themselves unless they are speaking during a public comment period. If needed, we may mute you ourselves. You may leave your video on or off at your option. If we experience bandwidth issues and believe that limiting video would help, we may do so. We will have at least 2 public comment periods. We're actually going to have 3 this evening. If at that time you wish to speak, please raise your blue virtual hand in Zoom and wait for me to call on you. If you cannot raise your virtual hand, or if I miss your virtual hand, please turn on your video camera and raise your actual hand. New Jersey law requires us to inform you that all commenters must behave appropriately. In Highland Park, this means no screaming, obscenities, or inappropriate video displays. In the event of a speaker's inappropriate behavior, they will be muted, and we will come back to them at a later time. If the speaker is the final commenter at the last final comment period, we will invite them to return at our next meeting. Linda, can we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Cimarosti?
Here.
Ms. Coleman?
Here.
Ms. Gowan? Ms. Gowan? Okay, I see you. Are you muted?
No, she's having an audio
Speaker isn't
problem.
working.
Oh, okay, thank you. Mr. Krieger?
Here.
Mr. Magaziner?
Here.
Ms. McFadden DiNicola?
Here.
Ms. Cruz?
Here.
Mr. Roslevich?
Here.
Mr. Woodward?
Here.
Thank you.
Linda, thank you. Could we have the Pledge of Allegiance now?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have 1 communications on February 1st from Emily Tenenbaum discussing shared services between school districts. I responded. I want to remind the public, if you want to send a communication to the board, please use the email address board@hbschools.net. if you send to individual board members or a combination of board members or to the superintendent and various board members, it will not end up on this communications. Please send it to board@hbschools.net. So next on to the student representative report. Polly, I think you were there, but I don't see you at the moment. You have the floor.
Hi.
There you are.
Yeah, okay.
Thank
So
you.
in the high school, congratulations to the students of the month for marking period 2. Those include seniors Zoe and Anexis, juniors Aisha and Micah, and sophomore Morgan Kovac, and freshmen Andrew Tejasvi and Zena. Congrats to them. And then the seniors in the Global Citizenship Program presented their projects last Wednesday. I went to the presentations. They were all really interesting, and they're doing a lot of interesting work, a lot of contribution to our community. They had topics like cuisine and culture and masculinity and food waste. So yeah, that was very interesting. Lots of good work. At the middle school actually has a new newspaper, the Parliament Press, which is really interesting. I believe you can find their website on the school's home. And then James Zhu received a Silver Key Award from the Scholastic Art and Writing Contest under Drawing and Illustration. And it was his first year participating in the contest, so congrats to him. And then lastly, from the middle school, Ms. Hawthorne, Ms. Figueroa, and the Community Arts Club finished their project for Windows of Understanding. Ms. Figueroa created the main image, and then the students contributed their own art in the areas and reflected their feelings on the important social justice issues. And I believe it's hung up on the corner of Kinetics and Pino's on North 5th. It looks really great. And then at Bartle will celebrate Random Acts of Kindness Day on February 17th. They're being challenged to complete at least 100 acts of kindness over the course of the week. And then after someone completes an act of kindness, they can make a Flipgrid video describing what that act was. And Ms. Knapp will also be reading to each class and discussing the importance of kindness. They're having a whole school meeting on Friday, February 19th, and Ms. Young is starting to host drop-in meetings for students to socialize, so she'll have times for individual grades. And then at Irving, they had a great turnout for their first Irving Zoom pajama party, which sounds like a lot of fun. Ms. Pat McGrath, their media specialist, shared stories with the students. They watched a short movie and they finished with yoga. So that's really exciting. Thank you to everyone that participated. Irving's school family will be celebrating the Lunar New Year. I believe, yes, this week. So they're going to be hearing a few stories and watching some awesome Chinese dancing throughout the week. So that's also great. And then finally, Irving is also celebrating the Week of Kindness. They're going to be doing various activities throughout the week. And then on the 17th, they will welcome Queen Noor, who will be sharing the oral history of African and African Americans. She has traveled to 38 states and overseas to share her tales and help people understand the value of their tradition. So Irving's really excited for that. And that wraps up the student report.
Polly, thank you so much. Anne, do you have something?
Did you say Queen Noor, as in Queen Noor of Jordan, or somebody else named Queen Noor?
I'm not sure, but I think that's just.
I'm not sure either, but I can find out, Anne.
Yeah.
I was going to ask that also. Please find out, because maybe board members and public members could join in and see her
That's
speak.
amazing.
I'm texting the Irving principal as
Thank
we
you.
speak.
Like Miss Klaslow might know something.
Oh, yes, please.
She's a great storyteller. She's a professional storyteller and she's traveled the world. and she's amazing. I had the opportunity of seeing her, and she just is so captivating. The kids are just going to love her. She just eats up the audience, and like they eat up her, and it's just a really give and take thing. So I think it's going to be great.
Thank you.
Probably not Queen Nor of Jordan. I imagine it's
Right,
No,
I
it's not.
can't
It's not.
imagine.
It's not
No.
that Queen Nor.
okay.
And if it is, it's 1,000 people all together, you know.
I was
it's
just gonna add, I've heard her
Queen
before as
Nor.
well. She's wonderful. She is wonderful. I've heard her before.
Great.
Thank
Great.
you.
Great.
Polly, I just wanted to say that this is certainly the time where we need kindness to each other. So it's wonderful that both Bartle and Irving are celebrating random acts of kindness. You know, it's a very difficult time. Any other board members want to comment? Okay, well, again, thank you. So, Scott, it's the superintendent's report now. So
Thank you, Mark.
take the floor, please.
So it's has been a pleasure these last 4 years to work with Susie Boudin, who is currently our Director of Educational Services. She's provided a lot of stability. Hasn't been easy over the last 4 years, but a lot of stability and some continuity that we needed all along. So I do believe this is Susie's 4th state of the special education program address to the board. If it's not the 4th, it's definitely the 3rd. I invited Susie to provide her annual update about our program, and she's also going to speak about the way we are working with students through the pandemic. And of course, she'll be available for questions if you have any. So Susie, I'm going to let you share your screen, and you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's important. If you want to hear me, I should do that, right? Good evening,
I say so.
everyone. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you again. We do this annually, so it's nice to be back together and have the opportunity to meet and have this discussion again. Okay. So the first thing I'll share is, I'm not going to go over all of the numbers. I'll just pull out some highlights, but this is the grid that I share every year when we do our state of educational services. And these are our numbers that has to do with our classified students in district, students out of district, 504s, INRS plans, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, and English language learner numbers. What I want to point out here is that, so these are numbers for now compared to June. So from June until now, we have seen an increase of 20 classified students, you know, in the district. So we have seen that growth. We've also seen a slight reduction in out of district placement. So one of the things that, you know, remote learning has afforded us is some opportunities for some of our students to, you know, to engage in learning online and to be able to do that with their peers here in town and not being an out of district placement. So we have a couple students that have been able to do that. And then we just have an overall general reduction. So we do see that reduction. We also have seen a significant increase in our speech and occupational therapy services. That's largely due to some of the very specialized programming that we've developed within the district. With that comes some increased need for services. So of course there has been some increased need for the staff to work on that. So we've had some contracted staff join us and we've been working on delivering those services. We've also seen an increase in our English language learners since June. So we have seen a slight increase in staff for that as well. The next page we're going to look at is our numbers for our referrals and transfer in so far this year. So one thing I do want to mention in looking at this is that the pandemic has had an impact on our ability to complete the evaluation process for many of our referrals. Our inability to do in-person evaluations for an extended period of time has really slowed down this process. So we're working as quickly as we can to get through as many as we can, but our timelines have definitely been impacted throughout this process. Some information to know is that of the evaluations that, of the referrals that were deemed appropriate for evaluation, 33% of those students have been found eligible for special education and related services. 67% of those students are still in the process or still in the evaluation process. So we're working through that. We are prioritizing students who certainly haven't received services at this point. Some of the evaluations that we have open are reevaluations for students who are already classified. We're prioritizing our students who aren't receiving services, our new referrals, to try to get them done as quickly as we can. And then, you know, continuing to keep up with our reevaluations and so on and so forth. Our number of referrals and transfer ins this year are about average. It's down from last year. We had a really high number last year, but we're about average this year with the number of students who've been referred to the child study team or who have transferred into the district. We have seen a pretty significant increase in early intervention referrals. Those are our preschool babies, our 3-year-olds. Last year at this point, we had 4 referrals. We've already had 11. We had a total of 8 for the entire year last year. And like I said, we're about halfway through the year. We have about 11 referrals already. So that's just some of the information to note on this page. So new on the horizon, next year we are anticipating opening another ABA program at Bartle. One of the things that we've talked about before is the impact of this type of programming. The maximum students allowed in a class like this is 6 students. So once we reach 6 students and we have more students than that, we do have to open another class, and we will be facing that next year at Bartle, that we do already have 2 classes and we're going to have more students there. You know, as our students grow and move up from Irving to Bartle, it does necessitate that. So we'll be opening another classroom there next year. We will need a new teacher for that classroom, and that teacher, if they've not already had it, you know, sometimes we're lucky enough to find a teacher that's already had the training, but if the teacher hasn't received the training, we will send the teacher out for the specialized training for ABA programming that we send all of our teachers out for, and they will be working on that. Something to note is that all of our students at Bartle in the ABA programming spend at least 1 class out with their non-disabled peers. So we work very, very hard, especially as we move up into the older grades, to make sure that any of our students who are placed in what's termed a self-contained classroom, that they have opportunities with their non-disabled peers. And we make a great effort to do what's called pushing out. We push them out for classes or opportunities with projects or special events and those kinds of things with their non-disabled peers. So that will be true for this class as well when we open this class. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges that we faced with COVID, because there have been many. As we all know, we've all faced many challenges. And I will say that I've been very, very impressed with the way our staff and our children and our families have really worked together to you know, to face this challenge and to take this on and to work hard to continue to grow and progress. So I've really been quite impressed with that as we've gone. So some of the challenges that we face, like everybody else, is the, you know, the learning to teach and learn differently than we ever have, which means taking on that digital world and learning all of the different nuances of engaging in Zoom classes and online learning and remote aspects and all those different things. So our teachers have spent a lot of time engaging in professional development to make sure that they're capitalizing on what's out there and taking advantage of all of the different tools that they can take advantage of to help our students grow and learn. They blow me away with the way things that they come up with and the ways that they've you know, learned to create the learning environment for our students. So they do engage in that. We've also worked on the synchronous and asynchronous learning environment, learning how to use, you know, things like, you know, recordings of the teacher giving little mini lessons, or, you know, different aspects of like that, so that when the teacher can't be directly with the student, they're able to, you know, really use those tools that are out there to keep learning productive and helpful for the students. And they've also really spent the time to connect with other teachers, other therapists, As administrators, we do the same thing, making sure that we're connecting with people within our county, people within our state, people throughout the nation, and sometimes people throughout the world, to make sure that we're growing and we're learning from them so that we can pass that on to our students. A big part of what we've done as well has been to support our families in helping with the educational process, because when the children are home, the families are intricately involved in this process and they need help and support as well. So we really spent a lot of time to make sure that our children have the appropriate technology, they have the appropriate connectivity. Dr. Taylor put in office hours to make sure that everybody had a standard time, that they knew that they could go to the teachers and go to the therapists and go to the child study team. The case managers and therapists and teachers have really spent a lot of time as well, putting in individualized supports and help systems for parents. They've created resources for parents. There have been the little lesson for parents about how to use Zoom and how to get into Google Classroom and, all those different pieces as well. I know that the child study team in particular spent a lot of time working on those resources for parents to help them with learning how to, keep your child engaged during an academic activity, or what to do when you've all been trapped in the house together and you're kind of reaching your limit, and, all these different things that parents are facing that weren't a part of education previously. So the child study team and the therapists really spent a lot of time on that. I have to even say my ABA teachers and therapists are even looking right now at the parents of their children and the support system that they need, which is very unique and different. And they're putting together an evening, group for the parents to come together and talk to each other about what they're facing at home with their children and the different supports that they need, and getting ideas from each other. So that's on the horizon. And just, as a whole, everyone coming together and creating those resources and supports for our families. And of course, motivation and mental health has been something that's really been at the forefront for all of us, because we know how hard it is for us as adults. So we can only imagine how hard this is for our children, and our parents are, working with their children at home who are facing I don't want to get on Zoom, and I don't feel happy today, and, why can't my friends come over, and all those different aspects of facing the pandemic. So for some of our children, that's meant that we've increased some counseling services. It may mean that we've referred some of our students to the teen center who haven't already been referred. And then there's the connectivity of connecting our families to community resources and support groups that can benefit them beyond what the school does and what the school has the capacity to offer, so that we can combine both what we're offering as support systems with what community systems might offer families as well. So we also, we've talked about the delays in evaluations. We've faced that as well because of the difficulty with being in person. We've also seen the difficulty of, not having in-person services. So we like I talked about, we're really prioritizing those students who aren't receiving services at all to make sure that we get to them, right away and get services in place for them. Staffing has also been exceptionally difficult. There is a statewide and probably nationwide, but there's a statewide shortage of staff, which has made it very, very difficult for situations like we had a therapist at the middle high school who went out unexpectedly on leave. And we had a really, really hard time finding a therapist for her. So we did eventually find someone, but we had a period of time where the students were not receiving their related service. So all of those related services were logged. They've all been put on a list, and every one of those missed services will be made up. So that I'll jump ahead to compensatory education there for just a second, because that's a part of that. So when we have a situation like that, where students are missing a service because we couldn't find a staff member, or, someone was out sick or something of that nature, if our staff member is missing, we make sure that we log that, and we make up those services. We offer compensatory education to make up those services. Now, if a student is sick, that's different. That's not a service that we're obligated to make up, but we make sure that when we have a service missed because of our staff member, that we make up those services. So we have seen, of course, the change in the schedule. The district as a whole went to a 4-hour instructional day. So that has, when you're looking at an IEP and what an IEP talks about, our IEPs are written as if we're in school all day, every day. So there is a little bit of a change to what's happening with the academic schedule. So it's just like if the school district called a half day, the IEP is written for a whole day, but we're only doing 4 hours of instruction. So the instructional piece is a little different from the IEP, but when it comes to related services, all of our related services are being implemented fully because we do have the capacity to provide related services, speech, OT, PT, all of that from 8:30 to 3 for the full span of the day. So our students are receiving 100% of the related services that are listed in the IEP. So let's talk a little bit about how we're monitoring our students and who may or may not need remediation coming down the line. So this is something that's definitely at the forefront of our thought all the time. So our teachers spend a lot of time in the classroom gathering data and monitoring the students, whether that be through classroom observations or how our students are answering questions. It might be through an assessment that they're doing, like a chapter test or something of that nature. It may be through a project that our students are completing. For some of our students, it has to do with how they're doing when they're interacting in their Zoom class. Are they taking turns appropriately? Are they able to manage their frustrations and, work through that? So some of what happens is done in that like day-to-day interaction that the teachers have with the students in the classroom. The IEP team also, when it's time for annual reviews or if it's time for an IEP to be revised, even if we're not at annual review time, they also will gather information, review what's going on, monitor progress. IEP goals and objectives are also tracked and progressed every time a student has a report card issued. IEP goals and objectives are also reported on. So the teachers are going in and they're looking at those goals and objectives and they're saying, did we achieve this goal and objective? Are we progressing gradually? Are we progressing satisfactorily? Are we not progressing on this at all? So those IEP goals and objectives are reported on every time a child gets their report card. Benchmark testing also takes place and is actually underway. Mid-year benchmark testing is underway, and most of our schools are at that point where they're working on benchmark testing, and that's important because that gives us a mid-year look at where are we, how are we doing, are we grasping the skills that we've been teaching. So a lot of that has been going on. It's the time of year for that. State testing may or may not come at the end of the year, but if it does, we'll also be taking a look in the future at the state testing results and what that looks like. And then some of our children will be due for reevaluation and they'll have some evaluations done. So we would also take a look at those reevaluation scores when the assessments are done. So when it comes to thinking about how we're going to address issues, if we have students who have some regression issues or aren't grasping their skills or they're not progressing at the rate that we would like them to, normally progress under normal conditions, our teachers and therapists are already looking at this. So when they're seeing situations where we might have some regression, they're trying to catch it at the skill level versus, kind of a little more globally. So as they're working through the skills, if they're seeing issues, they'll stop and they'll build in some remediation for the students to make sure that we don't let that go, that we work on that as we go. So there's already remediation happening in the classroom to work on some of these aspects. Some of the aspects, though, we might not be able to tell until later on. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is that there is some concern for like our ABA students or students who might be in an LLD classroom or some of the more involved classrooms about their social interactions and their social skills. That's a little hard to tell on Zoom. I can't really tell on Zoom how well you play with a peer. So that's something that we won't really be able to look at until we're back together. But as soon as we're back together, we'll have the opportunity to take a look at that and see if some remediation is needed. So what we can remediate now, we are remediating as we go. What needs to wait for later until we're in person will be monitored then as well. And we'll make sure that we're targeting those areas. We are in discussion about the summer and if there are any potential summer programming options that we could consider. So we are having those discussions. IEP teams will also discuss on an individualized basis, individualized student needs, especially when it's time for IEP meetings for annual reviews. But we may look at having an IEP meeting for a student that's not scheduled because we feel that we need to make some changes to that IEP and build in some supports and some remediation and different components as we go. So that's also on the path. One of the things that we do face with some of our students are students that aren't coming to school. It's not a large portion of our student population, but we do have students that are not engaging, that are not coming to school. There may be a situation where an administrator may make a decision that the student hasn't attended enough school for the year and they need to repeat the year. So that discussion is also, available and on the table if that's something that comes up for an individual student. One of the things I want to point out before I finish up is that because it is benchmarking time, some of the information has been shared with me by some of the teachers regarding how the students are doing and how they're progressing. And I will tell you that the vast majority of our students have adjusted remarkably well to online learning. One of the first places that I take a look is with our more intense programs like our self-contained classes, our ABA classes, our LLD classes, Glow Junior, those kinds of classes. I take a look there. I also take a look at our related services. And those are some of the first pieces of data that I was able to take a look at. So I know that Dr. Taylor had some items in your drive that the board can see, but just to kind of capitalize on that a little bit. So we do have, like I said, the large population of students really doing quite well. We do have some students that are progressing a little slower than anticipated, and they're already being looked at for what remediation efforts may need to be made with that group. We do know that the social skills is definitely an area that we're going to need to take a look at. So we're working on that piece already. The other place is, of course, our students that aren't attending and what they're going to need, because those students that aren't attending, they're not progressing. Or we might have a student that's attending school, but they're not attending their related services and that kind of a thing. The child study team and the guidance counselors and the administration and the teachers are all working very hard to try to support the families and children who aren't attending, to do anything that we can to help get them in school. But there is still a fraction of the student population that isn't attending. And without their attendance, it's very hard for us to help them progress and move forward. So we'll be looking at that group as well. But like I said, we are really pleased with the amount of progress. We've actually found that there is an entire group of students that are actually doing better with remote learning than they did with in-person learning. So it's been quite eye-opening, watching the students grow and progress, and it's really been exciting. Some of our students are really doing quite nicely with remote learning, and we're pleased to see that. So, okay, so that's my piece. Anything that you go ahead.
Susie, thank you. I want to point out to the board that I uploaded this presentation, but with additional data. There was a ton of data that Susie was initially going to share, but it would be very difficult for you all to parse through it. So you can see it. It's in the board drive in the superintendent's report folder. So Susie, why don't you stop your share?
Oh, yeah, sure.
We'll open up for the board to ask questions if it has any.
Sure.
I'd like to just thank Susie. That was really an excellent report.
Oh, my pleasure.
I appreciate it. Really, really, really good. From somebody who's been involved with finance and often gets surprises during the year about expenses and who's probably been a pain for you. I really appreciate what you do. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mark, do you want to call on the board members who have their hands up?
I'm looking, let's go right across the top then. So Monique, then Michelle, then Ann, please. Monique, you should go first, please.
I just put my hand up. There were others that had their hands up first, but if no big deal. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Susie. I know you came and spoke to Equity and Excellence, and so I was privy to some of your presentation prior to this evening. But I do have a couple questions because you highlighted a few. Obviously, you went into depth into some of the things that you all have been doing. And one area that we didn't talk about in Equity and Excellence is the evaluation process. And I'm actually encouraged to hear that you were able to conduct as many evaluations as has been done during this period. And I'm just curious to know, how were the evaluations conducted? And if there were remote evaluations, are there plans in place to then follow up those evaluations once you're in person to ensure just the validity and reliability of those results?
So the only evaluations that we can do remotely are the social histories. So these are interview based with the parent, and we are able to do those remotely. So 100% of our social histories have been taking place remotely. There really has not been any reason to believe that we need to follow up with an in-person meeting or anything of that nature for a social history. And for those of you who don't know, a social history is basically looking at the background of the child, the family dynamic, those different pieces, because especially when a child is initially referred for the first time, there are important pieces there to the evaluation process. Social histories don't tend to happen too much later, but at the initial stage, there typically is one there. Beyond that, other evaluations, the psychological, the educational, a speech, those different things, they have not been deemed appropriate to do remotely. You're not going to yield really reliable results. So we have not been conducting those evaluations remotely. They have been done in person. We did spend a lot of time at the end of the school year last year and at the beginning of the summer looking at the safety procedures that needed to be put into place to make sure that we had a safe environment for our students. And what that looks like is that we do, of course, all of the contact tracing and all of those different pieces before the student arrives. When the student arrives, we take their temperature. They do have to wear a mask. We do only one evaluator and one student in the testing location so that we don't have people there that, are unnecessarily there. We might, especially with a 3-year-old or something of that nature, we may have the parent come along if we need that. But other than that, it's just the student. We used a well-ventilated environment. Everyone wears a mask. We use a plexiglass barrier between the evaluator and the student. And then they conduct their evaluation. It is noted in all evaluations that these safety measures are in place for the evaluation because it is important to note that. We trialed several different clear masks when we were working, especially on speech, where, seeing the movement of the mouth and different aspects like that is important. We have been trying different clear masks. Most of our therapists that require that kind of found their own, I ordered a couple different samples and everybody tried them out, but everybody kind of found their mask that worked for them, and they have the masks they utilize for themselves when they're evaluating. So if there was any reason to believe that there was some validity concern with the evaluation process due to, the plexiglass barrier or the mask or anything of that nature, it is noted in the report, and there would be consideration to go back and reevaluate if necessary, especially if we felt like we didn't have the pertinent information that we needed to appropriately program for the child. To date, nothing has really come up like that, but we do know that that is there if, certainly if that should come about.
Thank you. And I just have two other quick questions. The next one is about the students who, as you said, are not attending. I know you touched on this briefly during our Equity and Excellence meeting. And you estimated, this is really rough, so I know it's rough. I'm just
it's rough. Please don't quote me.
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, I know the estimate was around 10 to 15%, but again, rough estimate. I know I would like to hear some, more definitive stats where that's concerned, it would be, you know, helpful, I'm sure, for your work as well.
Mhm.
But then what I also picked up on, a couple of points you mentioned tonight, and that is that there's consideration of possibly looking at having students repeat, students who have not been in participating. And so that sort of caught my attention, because I'm wondering, you know, I would hope that every effort would be made to not have that happen for
Yeah,
any of the students, regardless of the extent to which
Mhm.
they were able to participate. Because as you know, there's so many reasons why students
Mhm.
are not participating. So I guess I just want to put out there that I would hope that we can do everything possible to avoid that from happening. So I would like to, you know, hear probably in our next, in an upcoming Equity and Excellence Committee meeting, talk about that a little bit more and how we can ensure that students
Yes.
are not finding themselves having to repeat because during a pandemic, they weren't accessing the remote learning environment.
Agreed. Definitely not where we want to go. You know, it's unfortunate because there are situations where if you miss the entire 5th grade, you know, moving you on to the 6th grade is going to be problematic and difficult. And we need to really look at the different pieces that go into that and what we can do, what we can't do, what's needed, how much can we do with potentially a summer program there. You know, there's a lot to look at, and it's very different for for various students. So it's really a very, very individualized decision. And it's a decision between, you know, the administration and the parent to look at, you know, what are the preferences of the parent, how do we deal with different pieces. So it's definitely something that we're not there yet, and we don't have to face that yet. And there's a lot of time between now and the end of the year. So we're hopeful that we really don't have to bring that to the table for our students if we don't have to. So we agree with you. We're not looking to retain students by any means.
Well, right, because I think just to align this population with the, you know, kind of the general thrust of what we've been doing over this time period in terms of looking at not failing students, looking at trying to provide the supports needed, obviously not making sure that students are demonstrating growth and learning. So I would hope that we could align that, I think, commitment that we've made broadly or more generally to students who are receiving special education services. And that means really ensuring that they don't find themselves having to repeat a whole year of school.
Right. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mark, you're muted.
Yes, Michelle, could you, you had questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to stop my video because I've had some audio problems in the past. So Susie, I was really excited to hear that some students seem to be blossoming with remote learning. So I wanted to hear as much about that as you have to offer.
You know, it's funny that, you know, school's just not everybody's favorite thing, right? And we know that, like, some kids like love school and other kids are like, oh, school, you know. And it's funny because some of our students who weren't really hugely engaged in school when we were in person have really found their niche with online school, where they can wear their pajama pants to class, and you know what I mean, and like the dynamics a little bit different. So some of our students have really found that engaging. And then, you know, I do think there's an aspect of online learning that is engaging to our students, you know, using videos and, you know, games and different things like that, that maybe wasn't a part of the classroom that really works for some of our kids. So we've just really found that, you know, all of the teachers have said this, all of the therapists have said this. They, you know, they have their groups, they have their students who are progressing as expected, their students who are progressing a little slower than expected. And then they all have this group of students that they're like, I can't believe how so-and-so has blossomed in remote learning. And it just was surprising to me when I started looking at this data that every single one of them has a population of students like that. So I don't know that I necessarily know what, you know, what the little carrot is, or what about remote learning, you know, has been the key for each individual student, but there's definitely a population of students that have really, really found online and remote learning to to meet their particular needs. So
Susie, I've had a chance to speak with teachers, obviously, since March, frequently, and a couple of them have suggested the same thing for some general education students who
yes.
previously were very introverted,
Mhm.
shy, intimidated, maybe had social skill issues when they were
Yeah.
interacting with other kids in person, but felt a level of confidence and comfort that they hadn't felt before. Now they were in the comfort of their own home. Now, I'm not condoning in-person instruction as a
Right, right.
long-term sustainable instructional model, but I think for some kids there might be a silver lining in terms of learning.
Mhm. Agreed. Agreed. It surprised me. I was not that I was necessarily surprised that there were students that flourished. I was surprised by how many students there were that flourished with online learning. So
I'm so happy to hear that. And I definitely want to know more about how we can sustain the growth that we've been surprised with
yeah.
in the situation. I do think that sometimes chaos does change things for the good and the bad. And I would love for us to learn more about what changes we can sustain post-pandemic to help those same types of students, because I can imagine that asynchronous affords you some freedoms as a student that you wouldn't normally have in the classroom. I mean, I'm guessing, so I would like to not guess. If we could have some sort of, open file for teachers to give us input or make any kind of notes about what they think. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like this is a great opportunity for us to learn more about how to change our model of schooling that is really, as we all know, based in a different world completely. This type of factory worker type, public school system it doesn't work for everyone, and nor should it, and especially now. So I would encourage everyone to see if we could put something together, some notes or something.
Definitely. Definitely.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Anne?
Thanks. Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, Scott or Susie, if we could maybe talk about this again, could we pencil in an appointment to discuss it, to talk about what advantages of remote learning we could possibly bring into the school year for kids? I mean, I know for kids with social skills deficits, not having to deal with social skills makes it easier to learn. On the other hand, they're not practicing their social skills. So,
right.
Kind of a trade-off. I had just a couple questions. You mentioned that there have been some understandable delays in doing evaluations because of the pandemic.
Right.
Are we able to sort of provide a degree of services to students who haven't yet been able to have an evaluation? I mean, I'm thinking of a 3-year-old or an incoming 4-year-old who really needs speech therapy. Are we able to assist them before a formal evaluation is complete?
If we have a student who's a new referral,
yeah,
and they have not yet had their evaluations, we can't start related services and special services without the child being found eligible. So that has to happen first. That can only happen through the evaluation process. What we do try to look at is, and we've spent a lot of time doing this, is looking at what other support systems are in place that we can capitalize until we can get those evaluations done. So do we have a student who has a particular diagnosis that might qualify them for a 504 plan, and we could get a 504 plan in place until we can get special education in place if they qualify? What can the INRS team do? If we have a child, like you said, like with a speech related issue, can we have the speech therapist consult with the teacher to give the teacher strategies to use while we get through this evaluation process? So this is something that we did anyway as a part of the referral process, but it's like, it's on steroids now, because we know that we're behind on this timeline, that we can't do these evaluations, that, who knows how long this pandemic's going to last, all of that. So we really worked very hard to look at what else is there that we can use and capitalize on and maybe shape a little differently, or, those different aspects to support our students until we get through that evaluation process. So.
Are there a lot of our littlest referrals that haven't been evaluated yet?
Not our babies. They
Not
were the
babies.
first ones. They
No, I
were
know
the
you said
first
that,
one because they have like nothing in place. So
Right,
it's a little
exactly.
difficult for a 3-year-old, right? So they were our primary, that's where, as soon as we could do in-person evaluations, that's the first place that we went.
That's
for little
fantastic.
ones. So
Thank you so much. I had one other question. What was it? I guess we can discuss this after you leave if you want. Scott, I'm curious to know more about what steps we're taking when a student is just not showing up for 5th grade, for example, or whatever grade. I know we've, in some cases, we have Sean Harris going to meet with students personally, which is fantastic and really above and beyond. But I don't know if this is really Susie's subject, but what else?
No,
I'd like
it's
to know more about what we're doing.
we have so I can probably tell you who those kids are who we're down to not having much contact with at all.
Right.
Actually, it's maybe a handful of families with
Mhm.
multiple siblings. And those are such dire cases that we've had to get the Division of Child and Family Services involved
Oh boy.
because all of our efforts between Sean Harrison knocking on doors, our repeated calls, and whatever else we can do
yep,
have
case
failed.
managers going to the homes, certified letters going to the homes.
Wow.
I mean, you name it.
I mean, short of sending the police, which we don't want to do, obviously, to a home, we have to reach out to state services. I'm very careful, and I think my team knows how I feel about this, reaching out to the state when it comes to getting involved. But we're talking about, I mean, outside of the meeting, Ann, I'd be glad to talk more
Oh, yeah,
intimately
sure.
about these cases because obviously they're confidential
Yeah,
matters.
of course.
But yeah, we've got a few cases that, by the way, are not new because of the pandemic. And
Right.
Susie probably knows of at least one family with which I'm
Yes.
referring.
Right.
So yeah, we're continuing to take those measures, knocking on doors, following up with calls. There's little else we can do.
I'm sorry, can I just ask, you are talking specifically about students who are receiving special education services when you talk about
No, I'm actually referring to students either who are receiving special education services or not.
general, okay, in general.
Yeah.
I know one point that Susie, you did bring out in the Equity and Excellence Committee meeting, that is that the group of the students who are not attending are really the same students who were not necessarily engaged prior to the pandemic. And so I think that's important to note as well. Just in terms of the continuity we see even there and what needs to happen. I'm concerned when I hear you having to call the state in to get involved. So I would like to probably hear more about that in some sort of private follow-up meeting, Scott.
Yep. And my involvement is with our students who are classified. Dr. Taylor has a much broader scope of this. The piece that I work with and that the child study team works with are those students who are kind of under our auspices. So yeah,
I hope, Scott, that we'll do everything in our power before we call DIFAS.
Of course.
Despite the well-meaning staff at DIFAS, caseworkers who are really committed to the welfare of children, the system as a system often operates as sort of a surveillance mechanism, especially for minority families. And
yeah, I remember when I was a principal, my father, a young principal, my father, who's this, he's a musician, he's an artist, so he respects the need for ownership over one's, livelihood, right? He said, whatever you do, son, don't become a tool of the state. And that sat with me. It really did, because I truly recognize that once you make a phone call, let's say to what was referred to as DIFAS, it's now called DCF. Is a big deal. Now, granted, I got to tell you, and Susie has as much experience, if not more, than I do. When reaching out to DCF, I find that they're very apprehensive about intervening. I mean, you have to have, and I give them credit in that respect, because I think they know what power they can wield to become intrusive. But I found them to be very conservative about when they even. So even when we do call, there's a lot of trekking, a lot of investigating goes on before they even knock on our door.
Yes, especially now. And, I know that DCF gets this kind of bad rap because of what it often looks like when you're working with DCF. But there are times where they are able to get us supports for families that we can't get any other way. And there are times where we will reach out to them for help and support because we can't get access to those supports any other way but with their help. So we try the best that we can to kind of leverage their help and support rather than, go to that house and, it's not that kind of approach. It's really reaching out for help and support for families that we feel that, that we need to try to connect with. So,
I appreciate that.
we're pleased sometimes with what they can help us with. So.
I appreciate your conservativeness. I do think as an attorney who works with DIFUS every day, these investigations can take on a life of their own. You call because a kid's not in school, and pretty soon the parent has a list of requirements that they have to, fulfill to the.
Mm-hmm.
And even if the caseworker is, totally sensitive and culturally appropriate and all this kind of stuff, she's expected to show her boss, like, they went to parenting class, they did this, they did that, and that helps no one. So I'm glad that you're being very conservative. I really do appreciate that. Thank you, Scott and Susie. That's all my questions. And thank you for this presentation, Susie. It was really
my
thorough.
pleasure. My pleasure.
And thank you. Any other board members? Okay, Scott, is that the scope of your report tonight?
That is, and if you don't mind, I'm going to let Susie step out.
Again, thank you, Susie. Appreciate it.
Take care, Susie.
Have
Thank
a good night, everyone.
Okay, so on to number 9. When we were making up the agenda, Scott and Ann and myself, anticipating perhaps a number of members of the public would more than usual want to speak. We added a number 9, which is the first of 3 public comment sessions. This is a session where for those of you who would like to speak and don't want to go through our committee reports, and there are some extensive committee meeting reports that are coming, we put aside up to 30 minutes, 3 minutes per speaker. Please don't go beyond that. And I will read in the public comment statement, and then I'll open it to public comment. And again, raise your virtual hands, and I'll call on you in the order that I see people come through. So the Highland Park Board of Education welcomes public participation and has reserved this time for your comment. Board policies 164 and 167 establish and regulate the right of the public to participate in public meetings. And pretty soon I'll have that memorized. So if anyone would like to speak, just raise your hand and I will call on you. And we would appreciate if those who are speaking would turn their video on. Of course, it's not a requirement. It's not in our policy or state policy, but it would be nice to see who we're talking to. Okay, I do not see any hands raised. If you do want to speak and you could, oh, there you go. Seth Capperdale. If you would unmute yourself and take the floor, please.
All right, board, thanks for the chance to listen in on the meeting and to just hear the good work of the school during this tough time. And I want to just take a moment to thank the board and to thank Scott for Dr. Taylor for the willingness to kind of recognize that these are changing times during the pandemic and to begin trying to move people back to in-person learning and to make adjustments for winter sports. These things are really important. I deeply appreciate hearing the positives that you just expressed about some ways that certain young people have flourished with this new model of learning. That has not been my general experience for most students. So I hear that and like really respectfully heard it and hope that the good stuff that was shared can become part of the bigger picture. But on the whole, I'm deeply concerned about mental health, like serious mental health stuff in the community. The number of people that we're aware of who are dealing with medication and really severe things that they haven't had to deal with before that seem very connected to isolation. It's real and it's high. So I feel strongly that the move toward moving back together with social distance and masks and care is a good thing. And I'm glad for the adjustments to make a district-wide policy. And just thank you all for your efforts, Dr. Taylor in particular.
So, thank you. I did want to say that I hope we're ahead of the curve. The CDC is say they're going to announce new ground rules later this week, and they've been throwing out little tidbits and reports about trying to move us back more quickly, perhaps, than has happened. And we do seem, by the numbers that we take every day, that the second wave is starting to move beyond us. And so we really hope that we can get, and it is a very small number of our students back into hybrid mode. And then as more people, and I'm going to talk about this later in the president's report, as more people get vaccinated, and we get closer to a herd immunity, that we can bring more people back into the buildings. That's been our wish. Everyone, I hope knows that from day one, but we did set criteria. We can't be hostage to those criteria, but we set criteria and they've really kept us in good stead. And for those who don't know, Dr. Taylor has shared this with us. We appear to be the only district in the county that set hard and fast criteria so that we would make decisions based on numbers, not on what someone felt that day. So hopefully we'll be able to move back.
Mark, before we continue, Mark, Linda, you probably need Seth's address.
Oh, yeah, sorry, my mistake.
23 South 2nd Avenue. So.
Yes, and
I can attest to that.
Future speakers, please name and address. So Jeffrey Perlman, you have the floor.
Good evening, Jeffrey Perlman, 116 North 3rd Avenue. Generally, haven't spoken to the board. First of all, thank you to the board and thank you to Dr. Taylor for all the work you're doing. And again, similar to what Pastor Seth said about your work in sort of these really trying times. And it is related to sort of the community spread and that standard that determines whether the district is in person or not. And one of the things I wanted to just sort of explain, sort of ask today is, well, basically, I know that the Board of Ed and Dr. Taylor have done tremendous work in trying to work on this issue of community spread. You have testing that you made available to students and parents. It seems like, though, that the elected officials, the council and mayor, maybe are not as focused on reducing community spread. You may be aware that there was a Facebook post that was celebrating the increase in indoor dining capacity and the lifting of the 10 p.m. Limits on serving food and liquor. And it seems to me that maybe there's a disconnect between what the Board of Ed is struggling to try to do and what the borough's priorities are. And I'm wondering if you have reached out to the borough council and mayor to explain the importance of getting community spread down, sending the right messages, masking enforcement, taking the testing that the contract that Dr. Taylor you have, and opening it up to the borough and all residents, maybe working with borough council to have a joint contract so that now testing can be open to everybody. Things like that. Really just sort of communicating with the council. And I don't know if you're doing that or if you can make a statement, sending it over to mayor and council saying, look, Facebook posts that celebrate dining when our schools are not open, that's the wrong message and the parents who are struggling. Depression, students with depression, and then they look at Facebook and say, oh, look, they're celebrating more people swapping air unmasked with each other. That sends the wrong message. It really does. So I'm asking the Board of Ed, who has the right priorities, to send that over to the other side and say, hey, look, meet us and talk with us about how we can bring community spread down. And I'll stop.
Mark, I can start by sharing with you, Jeff, and the community that I do talk to Gail Mittler frequently. In fact, we were on the phone this morning and at a Zoom conference later. So we do communicate frequently with each other. She's well aware of my need to get the buildings open. She knows my standard. And I think she's respectful of that. I can't speak to the PR end of things. I don't know what they're doing with Facebook and whatnot, but I can tell you that I do feel like I have the support and the cooperation of the mayor.
Can I just do
Mark,
one
is there
follow-up?
anything you'd want to share, or are you good? I mean,
Oh,
that's-
I just, in terms of the testing, because I know that, maybe you haven't had as much interest in testing. I think there's an opportunity for like having testing in the borough that's more available. Like if I get tested just for, because my kids are at daycare or whatever, I have to go to Piscataway and Erickson Drive, and that's a drive, but if I had it in the borough, that would be, or people could do that. They wouldn't have to drive all the way over to Piscataway or Monroe, or whatever.
Yeah, Mark, I'm sorry. Let me just add one more thing, if you don't mind. Jeff, two things. First of all, any relative who's directly affiliated with our school district can use our testing regimen program. So feel free to, by the way, if your youngest wants to be tested on Tuesdays, to bring him or her over there, or them over. But the second point I want to make is that unfortunately, the company that we're using has only fixed itself on working with school districts. So I know that I did work with Gail a little bit early on to see if they could make a special arrangement, but unfortunately the company Back to Work Solutions has not branched out to working with municipalities. And tell you, man, it was a stretch for me just to get Back to Work Solutions in here. The board knows that I tried for a long time to secure some kind of testing agency. So unfortunately, they're not very prevalent. So sorry, Mark, I interrupted the board president.
No, not at all. Jeff, I would just say how difficult it is for all elected officials right now. And I talked to the mayor and some members of the council, and I wouldn't know how to put this. I might talk to them and tell them about what we're doing, and they might say about what they're doing, but I wouldn't presume to tell them how to do their job any more than I'd want them to tell the school board how to do our job. This is so hard right now. No one is getting guidance. In fact, I saw the message on Facebook and the response. They certainly don't need us to pile on. I mean, the response, you saw it, so I'm speaking directly to you. You saw the response. I would feel, for our purposes, this would be piling on. It was unfortunate, but I think it was, it was the governor's. It was one of the few pieces of guidance we get from the governor. I mean, the boards of eds have gotten no guidance. And I'm going to talk later about the boards of ed not being able to vaccinate our staff, our educators, our staff, all of our employees, because of arbitrary rules that the governor and state Department of Health have made. But I think perhaps appropriately, the council and mayor will see people at their meeting talking about this. And I certainly personally don't want to pile on other than talking to people privately. And Anne, please.
I just wanted to say, Jeff, I'm confident that when Scott meets with Gail, which he frequently does, he will communicate clearly the board's preferences.
Yes.
I mean, in a private setting. And, if that hasn't already been done, I'm sure it will be done. It is a very difficult time, but Scott is, I think, open with Mayor Mittler about what the board's priorities are and how the borough can work with us and vice versa on those priorities.
Thank
you, Jeff. Any other public testimony at this time? I'll wait a few moments. Okay, so seeing none, there'll be another public comment after the board goes through our committee reports and items for review. So number 10 on our agenda is committee reports and items for review. And that really should be coupled with the items A through E. We always run into this problem. But A through E, the different committee reports and agenda items, comes next, followed by number 11, which is the public comment, second public comment period. So curriculum instruction, Michelle, there you are. So I'd like you to take the floor and take over and do the curriculum and instruction report and agenda items.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to shut off my video again. Okay, so we had a very short agenda. Basically, we only have the one resolution, item number 2, which is for university graduate students for teaching internships and junior practicum observations for the 2020-2021 school year. And that is on the agenda. The committee, when we got together, we had a visit from Raising Hands. That's an organization led by Holly Turner, a Highland Park parent, and she was joined by Raising Hands board member Harry Blazer, another HP resident, as well as 2 of our Highland Park teachers, May Lewis and Mary Claremont. So our committee met with them and they gave us a presentation about what they can offer our district. And I sent everyone the committee notes. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty on that, just to say that they are offering to give us a training for up to 8 of our teachers in order to use the Orton-Gillingham method of reading instruction, which is similar to Wilson, which is what we have been training our teachers to use over the years. It is a little less restrictive, the Orton-Gillingham method, as far as we were told by Holly Turner during the meeting. And it would be a cost to the district of $4,000. It would result in up to 21 students having one-on-one tutoring for reading difficulties or things that might cause some trouble in the primary grades concerning reading. And our supervisors, Christina and Michelle, along with Christina Stocky, would be working with Holly Turner and the teachers as we move forward. So hope that the notes are clear. If not, after you read them, I hope I can answer questions. And really, that's my whole report.
Michelle, it's Monique. Can I just add that in terms of the cost, I think it was $4,000 per teacher, no?
That does sound.
4,000 per teacher.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds more accurate.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Actually-
I didn't mean to make it sound 4,000 in total. Yeah, I should have given the details a little more precisely. Thank you, Monique. So it would be 4,000 per teacher. It's a 5-day program for each teacher. And I think that they were offering it for 6 to 8 teachers. So depending on how many teachers were interested, that would determine the cost, the total cost.
And might I say that Anne and I met with Holly and Harry previously to set this meeting with curriculum up. I think it doesn't necessitate 6 to 8. It's kind of, it depends on number of teachers and also on budget, professional development budget. So, and it sounded excellent to me. Do we have a date when we could start something like this? Would it be for September, summer?
Well, I know our committee did have some questions though, Mark, about just, it's one of the discussions that we had was just about some of the differences between Wilson and and Orton-Gillingham. And I think the fact that this district recently adopted Wilson and now would Orton-Gillingham replace it, or is it going to supplement it? And I believe the part of that answer was that no, the intention is to supplement what's already being done with the Orton-Gillingham, but we were hoping to get some more information, I think, from Scott to follow up on this. before I think any decisions are made about.
No, I apologize. I didn't mean that we were going to do it. I only meant if we decided to go forward.
Yeah, and I should have said in the beginning that this was a preliminary type of presentation. This was not all encompassing. We did not get final answers or give final answers.
So I have directed Michelle Rodriguez, our humanities supervisor, to work with Holly. We actually met, Michelle and I, Friday morning after the Equity and Excellence Committee. I'm really pleased that Michelle seems to have a good handle on decoding strategies, and both Wilson and Orton Gillingham. So she'll start working with Holly very soon with some kind of foundation. And then we'll report back to both the Curriculum and the Equity and Excellence Committee as soon as we have more details based on what they talk about.
Darcy?
Hi. So, speaking as a parent in the district with a child with a print-related disability and, a board member who fought really hard for years to get us trained staff who could work with those students, because when my daughter was first diagnosed, we had none. I would really hope that the staff that we do have now who are Wilson certified are a large part of this conversation. Because it is a concern for me that we've invested time and training in teachers who are Wilson certified to then, and I don't know enough. I mean, I know there are differences between Wilton and Orton Gillingham. I know there are probably more similarities than there are differences, but the district has already invested a significant number of resources in the Wilson method. And I would hope that the two teachers that we have right now who are actively working with students are actively parts of this conversation.
Okay.
Yes, we'll definitely keep that in mind as we have our next discussion and curriculum for sure.
Okay. Any other
stories or questions that you might have for us to pass along, Darcy? That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be more than happy to participate in any forward going conversations on this. And I mean, I'm grateful that there is the opportunity to expand the number of teachers trained. I've been, asking for years that we have more teachers trained, because the fact of the matter is many students are getting services, just not the correct services. So if we have more teachers who are trained to identify students and to work with students, that's it. Even if we're spending money, we're saving money, because we're getting students the services they need at the time they need them, and hopefully we're decreasing the number of services they're getting over the years. Certainly, if my daughter had gotten the intervention that she needed at a young age, she was getting interventions. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like the district wasn't giving her interventions. They were. They just weren't the ones that she needed. These kids tend to need very targeted, very specific interventions, and we need more teachers who can do it. Absolutely. I just want to make sure we're not taking a right turn when we need to be going straight.
We did ask a little bit about that, and we were told by Holly that it would be, a complement to the Wilson method, and it is actually less scripted, meaning, I'm assuming more flexible and better in a tutoring environment, which is what I think this was meant to be. This was meant to be to provide teachers with a certification that they would be able to use in a tutoring environment one-on-one with the students. So we definitely want to ask more questions, but that was the information that we received in our first meeting. Marilyn, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. I was having trouble finding the raise my hand thing. Yeah, it keeps changing, it keeps moving. No, I mean, I definitely support the idea that more reading skill instruction is really important. And Orton Gillingham does complement Wilson. It can be done for small groups of students in the classroom. So if teachers are being trained in it, it's a very valuable skill to have, and it will help prevent reading difficulties later on, from my experience with it. So Wilson tends to be one-on-one, or Gillingham tends to be more small group, way I've seen it done. So it's definitely valuable.
Anne?
Marilyn or Michelle or anybody, it's not the kind of thing where if somebody is being sort of taught according, I don't even know the language. If someone is in class with a teacher who's Orton Gillingham trained, would the Wilson tutoring after school like sort of contradict what the student had learned? No,
No.
okay.
It's like, I don't know if you've heard the debates in education about whole language versus decoding. It's kind of that, like, we've been on a whole language kick for a very long time, and what these kids need, these kids can't, they're missing some ability to decode, to be able to look at a word and break it down into its syllables and sound it out. So my daughter has literally had to learn all of the rules. So, I mean, it's scripted. I mean, it needs to be scripted, because this is the way that these kids need to learn how to decode words. It's been fascinating to watch it happen. And I've done a lot of it with her at home, and I mean, it's a whole thing. So, I really appreciate what Marilyn just shared, because that's something that I don't know. And most of the work that has been done with my daughter, both in district and out of the district, has either been 1-to-1 or like a 2-to-1, at most 3-to-1. So, I mean, I know Wilson is, can be very small group. I don't know if, so there's just a lot of questions, and I just want to make sure, we're fully looping in the folks we already have in the district, who are doing the work, and how this would complement that work that's already in progress.
Well, we're definitely going to keep asking that question in further detail in upcoming meetings, but we did get that information from Holly, that it was complementary, not contradictory, and it was definitely high level kind of phonics type tutoring. So it was about decoding and sounding things out. But this is like, one of those decades old debates in education, and it goes flying from one end of the spectrum to the other over the decades. So, it would be nice to be able to have more phonics, but we did get some information about leveled reading that we heard in Monique's committee, Equity and Excellence. And it did make me a little concerned about the leveled reading. So I know that Holly did also mention that some of what they do in Orton Gillingham is to use the literature that's actually real literature rather than prescripted, SRA books like we had when we were in school. I don't know if you remember that whole box of SRA readers, and it's dry. It's like, see Jane run type stuff. So I think that Orton Gillingham, from what she was telling us, was pulling more from real literature in order to teach phonics. But we'll keep asking those questions.
Michelle, thank you. Anything else from anyone? Otherwise, I'm going to start on finance. Okay. So I'll do the finance and facilities report. So we met earlier today. And I'll just go through the highlights. At least one of the items we spent a good bit of time on is one of the agenda items. At our next meeting, we're going to get auditors' reports for last year. They will come to the Finance Committee at 6:30 before our meeting, and then the auditors will stay and give us a presentation in our board meeting about last year's results and any corrective actions, et cetera, like they do every year. So that's one important item. We will be starting to do our budget meetings shortly. We have 3 meetings with the Finance Committee coming up over the next few weeks. Hope to build a budget, review the budget. Probably we'll end up having 5 meetings. And then present it to the public, and then the state, and then pass a budget this spring. And just see one more thing. Yeah, and we did review where we stand on this year's budget. In other words, are we ahead or behind? And of course, we do have some savings this year. So we are ahead. We're usually ahead a little, but we're ahead more, we're ahead more than a little, and going through it very carefully so we don't spend it all at one time. And we'll see how that comes out. There's some expenses that will go up a lot next year. We're anticipating, for instance, transportation services will increase quite a lot because the bus companies are have to catch up on the losses they've had. So as for the committee report, we have items 2 and 3, which are bill lists and travel and expense related reports. We have a approval number 4 for a contractor for run with money which goes through the New Jersey Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Pardon me. We have a resolution number 5 to approve the submission of the CARES Emergency Relief Grant Amendment 1 to increase the budgeted amount to $12,956. That money continues to be spent. One of the items that Linda brought to our attention is that we're going to put water refilling stations in each of the schools, and we will use the CARES money for that. We are going to approve, or we'll put up for approval at the next meeting an addendum for ESS Northeast source for teachers to increase full day and half day substitute paraprofessional rates to comply with increase in New Jersey minimum hourly wage. Number 7 is the necessity of purchasing a wrestling mat. The wrestling mat is in dire need of replacement. And item 8 is will be to approve the cost of about $9,775. Resolution 9 is to approve a settlement agreement and release for a special ed out of district placement. This is one of the multi-year contracts. We approve it every year. And then item 10, we spent a lot of time on. This is a little bit complicated, but I'll try to explain it briefly. We had a contract with the Educational Services Commission to vet non-public school security aid for us so that we knew that the institutions that might be asking the state for the money, which we have to by state law vote on, that they were vetting the requests for the money. Thing is, we didn't have a contract this year. So Dr. Taylor is doing it at the moment. He's going to be vetting the aid, or he has been vetting the aid to the yeshiva, Renee Base Yaakov. And he has been meeting with a person at a school. That person has been meeting with the police department. We expect to get a written document from Dr. Taylor showing that they've complied with the law. They have told us why they want an armed guard because of some of the anti-Semitic shootings that have gone on. There was one I think it was in Jersey City last year. I think that's what prompted them to want to have an armed guard. But they will be complying with the state regulations. And I'm going to put this on the agenda because we either approve it, or if enough of us object to having an armed guard in any school, then it has to go to the state, to the county or state for their approval. And given that we are complying with the rules and they are complying with the rules, it seems reasonable for us to pass this item, which, by the way, we passed last year on October 10th. We passed the same item. So that's my report. That's the agenda items. Does anyone have questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to turn it over to Ann for Personnel and Communications Committee.
Thank you, Mark. Is my mic on this time?
Yes.
Oh, good. Excellent. So we met on February 1st. I shared with you guys the minutes. I normally don't do that because usually a lot of it's confidential, but think it's better practice for me to just do it. We discussed various staff members who would qualify for tenure in the next year. And while that, of course, granting tenure is Scott's decision, the personnel committee likes to stay in the loop, see what's going on. Ultimately, we will be voting to rehire the folks who will become tenured by virtue of being hired in their third or fourth year, depending on their status. Let's see. We talked about a plan for covering the high school orchestra and music theory classes. So we have a new high school orchestra teacher coming in. We're anticipating there's going to be a short gap between the end of Mr. Martino's employment here, he's resigned, and the beginning of the new teacher's employment, that's Sam Perez. So during that time, the plan thus far, we haven't been able to find a substitute, naturally, because it's difficult to find music teachers. The plan thus far is for Mr. Bolivar to teach band and orchestra classes sort of quasi-simultaneously, meaning he'll have people in small groups doing one thing, he'll do full group in different rooms, different Zoom rooms. So while it's not ideal, at least we don't have to sort of suspend the orchestra program during this period. And with any luck, the new teacher, Sam Perez, will be able to come on a little early and reduce the length of this in-between period. And I guess, I don't think we talked about this, but will Mr. Bolivar also be doing music theory during that intermediate time?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and for the rest of the board's sake, everyone should know that their resolution is not on this agenda that speaks to his covering these classes, but it will be on the next agenda. I'm working with Keith Presti, the union president, to figure out how we're going to compensate Miguel for what is a very out of the box idea here. But yeah, and he'll teach music theory, not AP, but general music theory.
Okay. And then Sam Perez will take that over?
Yep.
Okay, when they arrive.
You should stop searching for it on the agenda.
Yes. It'll be on the 22nd agenda.
Thank you.
Let's see, we talked about other staff that might be eligible for promotions, and we talked about a variety of confidential personnel matters. The personnel agenda is pretty self-explanatory. Number 2 is approving the source for teachers list, which we always do to ensure that we have approved substitutes to hire, a maternity leave of absence. Number 4, we're sorry to see that Ms. Gregus is resigning. We wish her the best of luck. Let's see if there's anything not self-explanatory. We have a Hebrew translator. That's Ms. Barr from our child study team. So that's good to know. And we have some 6th periods here. That's number 9. So evidently we needed coverage for 3 additional periods temporarily. I believe because someone's on leave, Scott, right? Number 9. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think this just changes dates that we already approved. Right. So Ms. Krupski, Ms. Marioni, and Mr. Roche will be teaching a 6th period for this period of time. And number 10, that's the middle school after school tutoring program, correct, Scott?
Yes, it's the extension program that we ran in the summer and now is going through the winter.
Right, got it. Okay, that's what that is, and that'll be paid for with our CARES money. And that's all I have. Questions?
Thank you. And any board members with comments or questions? Okay, then I'm going to turn it over to Darcy. Darcy, policies and regulations.
Hi, everybody. So right now, we only have one new policy on the agenda for first reading, but with all of your permission, I'd like to add quite a few, hopefully, for our next agenda. I'll try to get that early enough to everybody, so I don't slam you with a whole bunch of policies with only a couple of days to read them. But policies have been moving through other committees, which has been great. And I apologize. Policy was scheduled to meet last week, but tracking all of these policies turned out to be a little trickier than I anticipated. So I had to go back and do a bit of reconnaissance work to figure out what had been looked at in committees, what hadn't been, what got moved forward, what was ready to go to policy, what was ready to go to an agenda. So I now have that all sorted. And we have a number of policies on our next agenda, which we are going to actually look at tomorrow. So we actually have 11 additional policies coming, some from finance, some from personnel, some from curriculum, and some from equity and excellence. So I really appreciate all the committee chairs and committee members pitching in and moving through these policies. So I hope to have a few more for everybody to review on our next agenda. And if anybody has any questions about any of the ones on there now, we have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why do we put letters? It makes it so much harder. 1, 2, 3, 8 for second reading and 1 for first reading right now.
Andy, you have a question?
Yeah, although maybe, I mean, Chris, is this something you feel comfortable talking about, or should I just put my own spin on it? About the cell
Well,
phone
there was,
policy?
yeah. Why don't you go ahead? Because,
Okay.
yeah.
I was just wondering if Darcy, I mean, I feel bad that I didn't see this earlier. Letter B, the electronic communications and recording devices. It has a provision that says students cannot use cell phones at any time while in school. And I believe that conflicts with our typical practice in the middle school, high school. Again,
But
I apologize.
The issue was they can with staff permission.
I'll check again. I thought it said for curricular purposes or something like that.
Yeah.
Let me, Chris, what do you remember?
Yeah, the way it's written now, it doesn't allow exceptions for staff permission. I mean, that's what I would suggest is exceptions with staff permission.
I thought that was clearly in there because we discussed that.
Yeah, we did. I mean, that was certainly discussed in committee. Maybe the language needs to be a little bit clarified. So if you guys, between now and we meet again in 2 weeks, if you have any suggestions or recommendations, feel free to send them along and then we can look at them at the next meeting.
Sounds great.
Chris, you got that?
Or even if you want to send me something like tonight, policies meeting tomorrow at 5, we could look at that tomorrow in our policy committee meeting, certainly.
Awesome, thanks.
Darcy?
Yes.
Can I ask the policy committee to stay behind about tomorrow's timing of the meeting when this meeting is over? I wonder if we can make it a little earlier.
That might be a little tricky for me, but yeah, let's see if that'll work.
All right, if it's, yeah, maybe it'll be quick and you'll say I can't do it.
Okay.
Which is fine. Thank you.
Yep. Nobody else has any? Okay.
Monique, why don't you take over and tell us about your meeting?
Yes, Equity and Excellence met on the 4th, was that? Yep, February 4th. We had a very full meeting. First part of our meeting, we had special guest Susie Bodine, who gave us a presentation on the state of remote ed with students who receive special services, and we've already went over her discussion, so I'm going to move on past that. And then we were especially honored to have 2 student groups present to us their projects related to class and gender, and race issues in the schools and community. And so we had these student groups are all high school seniors that are taking Mr. Adam Gold's class, Race and Gender. And so as a part of this class, the students conducted their own research projects on topics of interest. And 2 of the topics were really, I sat in on the class, and 2 of the topics really fit quite well with the work that we're doing at a district level in terms of equity and access and curriculum change that's more culturally responsive. So we asked those 2 groups, or I asked those 2 groups to present to Equity and Excellence Committee. The first group, we focused on stratification and racial segregation at the high school. And one of the members of that group was our very own Polly here, our student rep. And she presented with Linnea Peterson and Liz Martinez. So this particular group, again, focused on stratification and racial segregation at the high school. They described their process of how they developed the a hypothesis on, based on their personal experiences and observations of their friendship groups over the years. They talked about how they did background research on their topic of interest, and then how they had to develop their research questions and methodology, of course, with Mr. Gold's support. And it was just really fascinating to hear them do, kind of a college level type of research process, at this point in their educational career. So they created a student survey to determine whether self-segregation actually exists, as they hypothesized that it does at the high school. And I believe they had 154 student survey respondents, and they found that the respondents were representative of the racial and ethnic composition of the high school generally. And overall, they found that students did feel more comfortable socializing with students who were more like them. But the students did admit that they were not able to conclude from their data that these relationships were totally related to race or ethnicity. They also, as a part of their research, interviewed a few teachers about their experiences with self-segregation and stratification in their own schooling. One teacher who went to school in an urban setting, and another who went very diverse urban setting, larger school, and another who went to a school similar to Highland Park, except predominantly white with less diversity. And so they talked about topics including the relationship between academic tracking, student interest, and class scheduling, and how that all ties into self-segregation. So the students, I guess in the midst of all their research, really started to think about solutions. And it was really interesting to hear some of their suggestions that they had based on, again, their research and their background literature review. They felt that there needs to be more structuring of racially and ethnically mixed work groups, sort of like cooperative learning strategies, even starting at the younger grade levels. And they also talked about intentionally recruiting diverse members of the student population to participate in different extracurricular activities. So, really good insight that a couple of these issues we have touched on in the past, but to hear it coming from students just really gave more weight to some of these issues that we've sort of been pondering from our adult perspective. Let me just look at another highlight. The students also just talked about the importance of how educational settings do provide meaningful interpersonal connections, and they really feel like the staff should be providing that kind of support and really facilitating more, mixed racial and ethnic group interpersonal connections. Elizabeth, one of the presenters, talked about how she felt that the big education gap really starts early on, based on the different leveled reading groups. And this is what Michelle was speaking to earlier. So she really honed in on that perspective, which was really helpful for us to hear. She also said that she had an experience with ESL students, and how she talked about self-segregation existing in the cafeteria and in the quiet room, I believe, and that's what kind of sparked her curiosity, looking at the way Asian students kind of sat together in one area and Latino students sat together in one area, even in the quiet room, and that sort of piqued her interest. So generally speaking, their takeaway was that yes, there's self-segregation. They felt like it wasn't as much as they thought it was based on the students' reporting, but of course, not being in school, they admitted that's hard to sort of build in real observations, like in the cafeteria and in the quiet room at this point. But I think the students impressed upon us some really important findings that we as a committee talked about taking into consideration in the work that we do, particularly around looking at the relationship between academic tracking and self-segregation, which the students referred to as a self-reinforcing cycle. So really astute observations they made. We were all very impressed with them. And of course we had Q&A at the end, and they handled the Q&A superbly. One of the questions that was asked was whether the students thought that this should be a required class, right? Should race and gender be a required class? And They all emphatically thought it should. They felt that they learned so much just about social class that they hadn't even learned before. And in the process of their interviewing their peers, many of their peers didn't quite know what social class really meant and all that it entailed. So, we as adults spoke about just how much students grew from the process of doing research that they gained from this class that was just as beneficial as the content as well. So it's quite interesting to hear coming from the students that they think this sort of class is just as important as, say, a financial literacy class, which is required. So that was group one. Thank you very much, Polly. Again, amazing job, and your colleagues. Group number two presented on AP Honors Class, AP/Honors Class Racial Disparities. And the presenters for that group were Wendy Yang, Sina Capperdale, and Yasmin Gold. And again, these students expressed, real passion about this topic based on their personal experiences and observations with, obvious disparities in terms of racial and ethnic representation in these AP and honor courses. As high schoolers, they said that they've noticed mostly white and Asian class in these Asians in these advanced classes, and they also really wanted to find out what contributed to these disparities. So they used interviews, surveys, they looked at class enrollment data that Mr. Lasher provided for them to confirm that indeed there was this disparity. And one thing that I thought was interesting in their analysis of the data from Mr. Lasseter is that they looked at the percentage of each racial group's participation in these classes, whereas we in the past, as our committee have looked overall at the class makeup and the breakdown per racial and ethnic group. With these students looked at, in addition to that, they looked at, well, per racial or ethnic group, what is the percentage of students that are taking these advanced classes, which we thought was really another enlightening way of looking at the data. So for example, and I didn't catch all the data on honors, but for AP, 50% of our Asian students are in AP classes, 40% of our white students are in AP classes, 17% of our Hispanic or Latinx students are in AP classes, and 9% of our Black students are in AP honors classes. So when I saw that, I was like, whoa, we didn't really look at the data like that in the past. So just another way to emphasize just how disparate these percentages are. Main findings from their student interviews and surveys, which again, I just love the way the students honed in on this, and that is that the opportunity gap started much earlier than high school, right? So the students themselves were able to see through interviewing their peers, what their peers found from their own experiences. And that is that from Bartle and Irving, students knew who were in like the good reading groups, who were in the good math groups. So, this sort of the leveled reading groups that students get placed in. Students amongst themselves are already talking about, or even if they're not talking about it, they're getting those messages about who the smarter kids are. And that impacted their own expectations of themselves, right? And others around them. So, students had more opportunities to advance and get better opportunities based on their abilities early on. And it's really interesting that these high schools were able to identify that and make that connection between that and where they are now in terms of AP and honors access. Students also talked about the importance of friendship groups and how, again, your friendship groups are usually going to reflect who are in your classes, right? And those classes, it's all this kind of self-reinforcing cycle. Another really important topic that we talked about was the transition of students who take primarily college prep classes into AP and honors, and the difficulty with which students, first of all, have even getting into those higher level advanced classes, and then also feeling like they belong once they get there. So, maintain, that kind of maintenance piece of access. Overall, the students found that students believe that their expectations of themselves and what they could do were correct, but they often felt motivated or demotivated based on where they sat on the opportunity gap. So I thought that was really insightful that students picked up on that relationship between what they feel the expectations are of others and how that impacted the students' motivation levels. Students also responded, again, these are based on their survey and interview results, that most students felt like race played a role in their class placements. The students also believe that college CP classes, college prep classes, were purposefully slower paced than obviously honors and AP, but also had very low expectations, too low for even, the level of that of work that is supposed to be covered in that class, or the amount of work that's supposed to be covered in that class. So slower pace, but the expectations are still too low. And then in terms of just the recommendation system, and this is again another topic that we've been discussing in Equity and Excellence, and the students just added more, put a tack really into the importance of addressing this issue, and that is the fact that students still have to get a teacher's recommendation to teacher's recommendation to get actually placed into these classes. I lost my place in my notes. Some students felt that really it should go through guidance counselors asking the students first what they would like to do based on where they feel that they're capable of functioning, and then having a guidance counselor recommendation based on that. Some students did say that they felt concerned about students making that leap and not having the teacher recommendation because of the content gap between college prep and honors and AP level classes. So there was that acknowledgement there, but then there was also the acknowledgement that even if there were to be a removal of the recommendation requirement, that's still not enough, right? Students need to still get additional support if they were to, to make that jump. So dropping the recommendation is really just the first step in opening up access and helping students excel at that higher level requires more support from the district and the staff. So Dr. Taylor did really appreciate, I think, this feedback from the students and just hearing some of the highlights of the qualitative and quantitative data they collected. I know you, Scott, you talked about really sort of weaving some of the students' quotes into your conversations and discussions with leadership team around these issues. And that you do plan to look at some work that's been done in other school districts by others, or at least one other school district, probably not many, in terms of looking at removing that teacher recommendation requirement for AP and honors classes. We've been talking about this in Equity and Excellence, but I think, again, we just see more of an impetus to really get this moving and to see what needs to happen to make this happen. But then, as the students said, even be prepared to go beyond that in terms of support. So that students can be successful in making that jump. So sorry, that was really long, but I didn't want to change the presentation that these students gave. I will say that part of our follow-up discussion, Rob, we all agreed that these students need a larger body of a larger audience for this presentation, or for their presentation. So we'd hope that at some point they could present for the board. We would hope that at some point staff, teaching staff, the leadership team can hear also the findings that these students have presented to us, so that we really do find ways to integrate this data into our work and take it to heart. So I'll stop there. I see, Darcy, you have a question.
Monique, thank you.
Yep. Well, yeah,
Darcy?
I mean, you went exactly where I wanted to go, Monique, was I want to see it. Like, I want to see what they put together. So, I mean, if the students were comfortable with that, I personally would love to just see it myself. To have them present it would be just that much better. To us, to staff, to whoever, wherever.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that's been a board priority for a number of years now, and it's stunning to me how it is pushing a boulder up a mountain. It's unbelievably hard.
Mhm.
There are systemic things in place that just make it very hard to dismantle those systems. And even with a board that has this as a priority, we're still here.
Right.
So, it just makes me think, Mark and Scott, we're probably overdue for a presentation on where we are with the efforts that we have made.
Right.
Thus far for the classes that have been, the honors option classes, how many we have, how they're doing, what that data looks like. I'd be curious to hear from kids who've been in those classes to see if they think, even in that small subset, if that's made any difference.
Right.
And if not, I mean, Monique, you're right. We've been talking about taking some of those barriers away for years.
Yeah.
And, we're clearly not there.
One thing that I talked to the curriculum committee and the equity and excellence committee about 2-3 months ago. This is actually maybe further back, prior to when we had Terry Young sign up as the advisor of diversity and inclusion, is to now take that leap. I have no problem going in public saying, if I had my druthers, I would eliminate criteria for all honors and AP classes. I think it creates an elitist system that we need to crush. And yeah, there are systemic problems, but Darcy, one thing I'm learning about the grading reform efforts we're taking is sometimes you need to shock the system.
Yeah, I was
Maybe
going
we're
to
at
say,
the point where we have to shock it.
but you're the super. You're the guy
You have the druthers, Scott.
You're the guy who gets to make those calls.
It's your decision.
Well, look, and the thing is, we better be glad we're not like South Orange. We could be like South Orange Maplewood and facing a lawsuit for the fact that we have this kind of, segregation literally in our classrooms. And, again, I'm not making light of this, but the fact is that, this is about system change. If we don't have system change, we're just going to keep pushing up this hill very slowly.
And the more
backwards.
Yeah, I mean, the more I've read about these issues, the more fascinating it is, right? I mean, I think Highland Park likes to pat itself on the back a lot for its diversity, but we still don't dismantle the systems that maintain segregation. And, we had a forced desegregation order, it wasn't like everybody came in and was like, we're going to do this on our own. Our housing is very segregated. If we didn't have that forced desegregation order, our schools would still be very segregated. And we are not the only place in the country with a forced desegregation order that then recreates the segregation within the desegregated schools.
I think that's the majority.
That's what tracking does. Tracking recreates segregation within the building. So,
yeah. And to hear from the students, I'm sorry, but to hear from the students, and just FYI, since Darcy mentioned housing segregation, one of the groups did present on housing segregation in Highland Park. And, I recommended them to the council, to the mayor and her racial equity advisory council group, because I said, obviously, that's the domain for that discussion. But also, in a sense, again, the students connected that to them, their school experiences, right, and their friendships. And so, there's just a lot to tackle here. But I'm telling you, I really, as if I needed more fire under my belly on this issue. But the students really did that for me. And I mean, I literally got emotional in one of the presentations, and I'm just like, they're bringing up things that are really personally a personal attachment for me. And so for them to really express so passionately what they've observed and how they feel about it really just tells us how important it is for us to do this work. We have students who are seeing themselves, their friends be impacted by this kind of segregation and this lack of opportunities for many students. And so it's incumbent upon us as adults. And, we kind of heard that the adults really need to do more. We need to do more.
No, and I really appreciate you relaying it so clearly, because it got me all fired up again too. So thank you, Monique.
And did you want to speak? No? Michelle, you wanted to speak? Then I'd like to speak.
Yes. I just wanted to really quickly say how impressed that I was with the presentations. I was visiting the Equity and Excellence Committee, and I got to be there to see the presentations. And I was one of the board members who was pushing for these kids to come and present to the board, but also to present to the school district as far as, faculty and others. What I found really potent and also emotionally moving was that these kids are kids that I've known since preschool, because they're my son Luca's age. And I could have told you, and I think I probably did in many ways, like lots of these different stories through the years, but it's something else to hear it from their own mouths. And it was tragic in so many ways because these were kids who, you know, like I've been on the board for 6 years, and I felt personally guilty for a lot of what they were reporting, because this is exactly the stuff that we've been trying to get changed. And here they are, seniors, most of them, reporting to us all of the things that, you know, lots of us predicted were the causes of these problems. And, you know, it's not like I'm patting myself on the back for, you know, saying, yes, you know, these are problems years ago. I don't care, you know, that I did notice that these things were there, because a lot of us did. It just made me really sad to think of how many adults recognized that this was a problem and, you know, couldn't really do much. And it made me feel so frustrated and so sad that these kids were then reporting back to me and the other board members, yeah, this happens. This is what we do. And this is where, you know, lots of my classmates are. And so my question to both groups was, would you make this class mandatory? Since I'm the, you know, head of curriculum, that's what I'd like to know. And they practically jumped out of their seats to answer, yes, absolutely. Like, it was all girls in this class, first of all females, not one male student volunteered for this elective.
And all seniors.
And all seniors. So yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful class, you know, tip of the hat to Mr. Gold. But I would like for I would like for us to make it mandatory, and for us to have this presentation somehow like preserved for all of us to watch over and over again. And that's all I have to say.
Michelle, thank you. I wanted to make a short comment, Monique. I read your notes before the meeting, which were wonderful, and you definitely presented it all. And the students who did it really need to get some kudos, because they really did serious graduate level work. You know, it wasn't, I would call it even college level work. They took it very seriously. I sat at this same desk, not at home, but in a building 30 years ago as a board member. And we talked about how all students could learn, and that there's de facto segregation in the honors and AP classes, and with a board that equally felt, let's do something. And what Darcy said really stands out, that it's, you know, we did the honors option and we were like, this is fantastic, but it's like pushing a giant boulder up the hill, and we have to change that. One thing we could do with that class is make it mandatory, and make it mandatory not for 12th graders or 11th graders, but 8th or 9th graders. We have work going on, which we would have done this year, but for the pandemic, for the Math 6 class, to change how that works. Maybe go younger, change the classes, because we've had testimony here in the past from parents talking about how the problems don't start at the of this de facto segregation in middle school, high school, or even Bartle School, but it starts younger, and maybe it's time to visit that. So, and it is time to visit that, clearly. And Scott, this is something I would really, I think you really need to, the self-selection to those classes, it's, you know, your decision. And so you should, if you want to do it, you should do it, but we should think of other creative, out of the box ways to make things happen. So I'm done. Any other board members with comments or?
Yeah, I would just add, I'm sorry, really quick, that we did talk about, and I think Michelle is adding both the Irving and Bartle level reading group stratification to the agenda for the next curriculum meeting, if I'm correct. So we're already starting to just follow up on the data that the students have presented. This is such a critical piece of this whole system change we're talking about. And that is looking at the younger grades and what's happening with these groups and how it's impacting students down the line. Yeah, so thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Okay, if there is nothing else, we're up to, since we're not voting tonight, we're up to the second public comment, item 11. The Highland Park Board of Education welcomes public participation and has reserved this time for your comments. Board policies 164 and 167 establish and regulate the right of the public to participate in public meetings. If you want to testify, please raise your hand. I'll call on you, and remember to give your name and address. And if you could, please turn on your video. We'd like to see you. You see all of us, so be nice if we could see you. Okay, well, I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to move on. There is one more public comment. I do have a very, very short president's report. And that is, Scott is the president of the Middlesex County Superintendents Association. I hope I got the name right.
You did.
And we had been talking about sending a letter off to the governor. And he said, better yet, our group will send a letter off to the governor on the topic of vaccination of our school personnel, our educators, our staff, our teachers, our paraprofessionals, our administrators. We are the only, and they did. They have written such a letter. I commend them. It's really good. We are the only state in the tri-state area which did not put educators in the 1B group to get educated early. And it's really, to use a serious word, it's an outrage. It's ridiculous.
Mark, they were. Like Dave and I were just talking about this today. When he first signed up with the state system,
right?
His response email says 1B. They were 1B, and then they took them out. At
I know.
the same time that everybody is pushing to get kids back, it's insane.
It's an outrage. It's outrageous. It's ridiculous. And they're still not moving. I had heard a rumor a week ago, 10 days ago. He was from somebody kind of politically connected in Trenton. They're going to change it. The teachers are going to be at the top. By the way, I was 1B the day it came out because of my age and some health conditions. I stayed 1B, but half the state was 1B. With any, they said 4 million people could have been, or 3 million people could be 1B. And I was then scurrying around to get a vaccination. But meanwhile, the teachers couldn't get, and the staff and the paraprofessionals and others couldn't get a vaccination. So it's pretty outrageous, and it's got to change. And so we have some public here, and I've certainly written to the politicians, the elected officials, right to your state senator. He's on our team, I believe. Right to the assembly people, right to the governor's office, right to the head of the Board of Health in the state. We need to have our educators vaccinated. We're not going to be able to open the schools.
There's 116,000 educators in New Jersey. 1 week's worth of doses would get the entire state's educated.
Let's make sure we get the maintenance. Let's make sure we get the maintenance staff too, the janitors, all those folks who are so critical to our kids.
This is a big deal. The numbers are coming down. They're coming down enough that we can start to come back to hybrid if the numbers don't go up again. In the next 3 or 4 days, we will be able to get some of the kids and some of the staff back, but it's really not enough. We have to do something.
I'm going to make a suggestion, and I was going to make a different suggestion for new business, but I'll just say it here. How about for our next meeting, we work on crafting a short and sweet resolution on this topic, and we'd be able to then pass it in a couple of weeks. Hopefully something would change faster than then, but if not, at least it's out there. Because I also wanted to do one to implore Murphy and the commissioner to ask for a waiver for state testing. Other states, New York has also asked for a waiver. New Jersey, we're doing nothing. We're still pretending as if we're going to test kids as if everything's normal in April, which is
it's ridiculous.
Utter insanity.
So yeah.
We could very easily draft 2 very quick resolutions that we would then send to our, to our legislators, and that we could then also get out to other boards to try to, get them to do the same. Because unless you start harassing legislators, nothing's going to happen.
I serve on the governor's task force for the reopening of next year's school year and how we're going to end this school year. We met today, and me and the other 3 superintendents in the group were very vocal to make the waiver push one of our top priorities. So we're going to try to focus on that effort as well. It is we met with two NJDOE people, and they seem to be in agreement with us. They're surprised, like all of us, that we're one of the only states in this area that hasn't gotten that waiver yet. Ridiculous. And right now, by the way, the NJSLA is scheduled in a couple of months.
Right. Well, and it's not even that we didn't get it. We're not asking for it. And they're all systems go for April, which is lunacy.
Yeah.
I was thinking of a resolution for this meeting. I assumed 10 days ago, teachers would be ready to be allowed to be vaccinated. It's crazy, but let's put it on. I'll work with Ann and Scott and get a resolution for both onto our agenda for next time.
Okay, I'm happy to help.
Okay, thank you. Good. You can help.
I love writing a
I
resolution.
have a question about that. Scott brought up the state testing, the NJSLA coming up. Would it be possible to tie that into this resolution? Because the idea that, we haven't, many districts haven't even had the opportunity to have, kind of traditional instruction, but
Right.
yet we're still we have to be compliant, so to speak, with the state test. So I feel like there needs to be some sort of vocal expression of even
that was our effort today. Me, Will Smith, the gentleman who some of the board members heard talk about AP testing in Point Pleasant, was on that
Right.
committee. Matt Mingle, who some of you know, and we all said the thing, Monique. You kidding us? Some of us have 4-hour days. Come on.
I have students who haven't even, because they have print disabilities, haven't even had textbooks this entire time, at least not through the entirety of this time, but yet I'm filling out accommodation forms for their testing. It makes for state tests. It makes no sense at all. So, and I know this isn't a problem across the board. So I just feel like as a district, even it's our responsibility in terms of the positions that we're in to say, no, this is not acceptable that we're putting our students, possibly putting our students through this.
I think too.
Also, sorry.
No, go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that the governor did excuse seniors from the NJSLA, the exit exam for graduation. It's no longer a graduation requirement for this senior class.
Right.
So, I don't know why it would be so difficult to do for everyone what he was able to do for seniors, except maybe they're closer to voting age than other students.
I like the idea of 2 separate resolutions, Monique, and sending those off to other school districts. I'm friendly with the president of the Metuchen board, and to the governor, to our legislators. I hope by 2 weeks from now, but who knows? I hope that all of our staff can be vaccinated or allowed to be vaccinated. And it certainly, this, after the statement made by Middlesex Borough that they're waiting to open it all until all of the teachers are vaccinated, when is that going to happen? So, and I would also encourage any, some of our teachers and paraprofessionals can't come in because of medical conditions. And I know that when I mentioned myself getting vaccinated in a meeting with some of our staff, I got some chat notes that, oh, I'm getting vaccinated too. So people are being vaccinated, but because of medical conditions. But we need a serious effort to get the 100 or 150,000 people all vaccinated, including, as the letter that Scott's group put out, with perhaps mobile centers going to schools and vaccinating people.
So what I would suggest is we can take some of the language from that letter, and I agree, Mark, that it should be 2 separate resolutions. And if we get them done in the next few days, we could put them out on social media and with different groups that we're affiliated with, just to say, Highland Park, has drafted these resolutions, and what we've done in the past is we've put out kind of blank ones where you can fill in your district name here, fill in whatever, and then just kind of get them out and around, not saying that we've adopted it because we haven't, but that it's going to be on our next agenda. But then other boards can take that and make them their own as well, and just kind of start getting that ball rolling. Because
could you take on the first draft of that?
I'm
Darcy?
sorry?
Could you take on the first draft of that?
Yeah, if you guys send me the letter and
I will.
it's out there.
Scott can.
And there was
get it to you.
just an amazing, I don't know if anybody saw, there was an amazing op-ed in New Jersey Spotlight today from the, I don't know if she's the executive director of the New Jersey Principal and Supervisors Association, Patricia Wright. Just a really, really lovely piece about, students and learning in schools in a pandemic. So I'd love to pull some of her points from that as well. She did a really good job. So yeah, let's do it.
Thank you, guys. Does anybody have old business? New business? Okay, we're on to our third public comment period. I haven't memorized it yet, but I will soon enough. The Highland Park Board of Education welcomes public participation and has reserved this time for your comments. Board policies 164 and 167 establish and regulate the right of the public to participate in public meetings. Please raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you and give your name and address, please. Okay, well, before we adjourn, I want to just say that thank the board for this really very interesting and thoughtful meeting, discussing things as if we didn't have a pandemic, actually board and doing things. So thank you, everyone. And with that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Good night, you all. Thank you. Thank you, public.